There are books about money that try to impress us with complexity, and there are books that endure because they simplify what people have always needed to understand. The Richest Man in Babylon belongs to the second kind. It is a book that has remained alive across generations not because it gives readers a technical map of modern finance, but because it speaks to a deeper truth. Money is often less about mathematics than about behavior. It is about what we do repeatedly, what we postpone, what we protect, and what we choose to value. George S. Clason understood that long before personal finance became an industry. He chose not to lecture. He chose to tell stories. He placed his lessons in the world of ancient Babylon, a city imagined as a center of trade, beauty, wealth, and ambition. Through craftsmen, merchants, lenders, and dreamers, he offered a series of practical laws for acquiring, keeping, and growing money. The result is a book that feels old in language, but current in meaning. In this narration, we are not only going to summarize Clason's main ideas. We are going to slow them down and sit with them. We are going to ask why such simple advice remains difficult to follow, and why these old parables continue to feel surprisingly modern. Because behind the gold and the desert and the robes and the marketplaces, the book is really describing us. It is describing the person who works hard but somehow never feels ahead. It is describing the temptation to spend first and save later. It is describing the search for wise guidance and the danger of trusting the wrong voices. It is describing the desire for security, freedom, dignity, and peace. And perhaps most of all, it is describing the transformation that begins when a person stops drifting financially and starts acting deliberately. The Richest Man in Babylon is often presented as a book about wealth, but beneath that, it is a book about self-command. It is about becoming the kind of person who can build a future rather than merely react to the present. That is why it still matters. The details of the modern economy have changed. Human nature has not. Clason's decision to set the book in ancient Babylon is not just a stylistic choice. It gives the lessons an almost timeless quality. By moving away from modern life, he removes many distractions and brings the core principles into sharper focus. Babylon becomes a symbolic place, a city of abundance built by people who understood trade, order, and the power of wealth. In that setting, the question becomes simple. If a city can become rich, how does an individual within that city become secure and prosperous? The answer the book returns to again and again is this: wealth does not come merely from earning. It comes from handling what is earned with wisdom. That central premise may sound obvious, but it cuts against the way many people live. We often assume that the answer to financial stress is always more income. More salary, more opportunities, more side work, more luck. Clason does not deny that earning matters. But he insists that a person can earn much and still remain poor in effect if nothing is kept, if spending rises to consume everything, if money is placed in foolish hands, or if present desire constantly defeats future purpose. This is why the book feels so disciplined. It moves the conversation away from fantasies of sudden wealth and toward habits. Clason wants readers to understand that prosperity is not a miracle. It is a structure. It is built on rules that sound plain but are difficult because they require restraint. In the Babylonian stories, the poor are not always poor because they lack opportunity. Often they are poor because they have never learned the laws that govern money. And the wealthy are not always wealthy because they are more fortunate. Often they are simply people who learn to respect those laws earlier and more consistently. The book, therefore, invites the listener into a different perspective. Instead of asking only how to get more, it asks a more important question. When money comes into your hands, what happens next? That question, Clason suggests, determines more than most people realize. The most famous principle in The Richest Man in Babylon is also the one that many people resist the longest. Pay yourself first. Save at least a tenth of everything you earn. The brilliance of this lesson lies in its simplicity. Clason is not asking the reader to wait until life becomes easier. He is not saying save when expenses calm down, when income increases, or when the future feels more predictable. He is saying begin now from whatever you earn by claiming a fixed portion as your own. The emotional force of this teaching comes from the way it changes identity. Most people think of themselves as working in order to pay others. Rent, bills, food, obligations, debts, wants, emergencies. At the end of the month, they may feel exhausted and still empty-handed. Clason reverses the order. He says the first person you must pay is yourself, meaning your future self, your security, your independence, your eventual freedom. This is not selfishness in the narrow sense. It is responsibility. It is a recognition that a person who never reserves anything for tomorrow will remain trapped by today. The lesson also reveals something deeper about human behavior. We often imagine that we cannot afford to save. But Clason suggests that the issue is not always affordability. It is often priority. If we learn to treat saving as optional, it will be postponed again and again. If we treat it as a law, we begin to adapt. Spending shrinks, creativity grows, and the mind starts organizing life differently. There is also psychological power in watching savings accumulate. Even a modest reserve changes how a person feels. It builds a sense of order. It proves that discipline is possible. It reduces helplessness. Clason wants the reader to feel that first sense of ownership, the knowledge that not every coin must immediately leave the hand. In modern language, this principle remains foundational because nearly every sound financial strategy begins here. Emergency funds, investing, debt reduction, long-term planning, retirement, even the ability to take opportunities all depend on the habit of keeping something. Without that habit, financial life remains fragile. With it, even small beginnings become meaningful. Pay yourself first is not only advice about money. It is a statement about self-respect. It says that your labor should create not just survival for the present, but strength for the future. Once Clason establishes the importance of saving, he turns to an equally necessary truth. Savings do not appear by magic. They require control over spending. This is where many readers discover the sharp edge of the book. It is relatively easy to admire the principle of building wealth. It is harder to confront the endless flexibility of our desires. Clason observes that what people call necessary expenses often expands as income expands. Wants quickly learn to wear the costume of needs. The more we earn, the more life presents new reasons to consume. The result is a strange trap. A person may feel under constant pressure not because they earn too little, but because every gain is immediately absorbed by a more demanding lifestyle. Clason's answer is not joyless austerity. He does not say life should become bleak, harsh, or stripped of pleasure. Instead, he argues for thoughtful selection. Not every wish deserves fulfillment, at least not now. To control expenses is to decide consciously what matters and what can wait. It means refusing the illusion that comfort comes from satisfying every appetite. In fact, Clason suggests the opposite. The person who cannot govern desire becomes restless and financially unstable, while the person who sets boundaries creates room for peace. This lesson feels especially relevant because spending is not merely practical. It is emotional. People spend to soothe, to celebrate, to signal identity, to reward themselves, to escape discomfort, or to keep pace with others. Clason does not use modern psychological language, but he clearly understands that money behavior is tied to human longing. His advice is therefore not simply make a budget. It is learn the difference between what enriches life and what drains it. Learn that satisfaction can come from discipline as well as indulgence. Learn that every unnecessary expense quietly competes with a future that could be stronger. A striking part of the book is that controlling expenses is framed not as punishment, but as liberation. When spending is deliberate, money begins to serve a plan rather than a mood. Anxiety decreases because chaos decreases. The listener can hear in this principle a larger philosophy. Freedom does not come from saying yes to everything. Freedom often comes from the ability to say no without resentment. Financial maturity, in Clason's world, begins when a person stops being ruled by every immediate desire. Clason never treats saving as the final goal. A pile of money hidden away may create a certain comfort, but if it remains idle forever, it cannot fully transform a life. One of the book's most memorable ideas is that saved money should become a worker. Each coin, in effect, should earn more coins. This is Clason's language for investment and compounding. It is his way of teaching that wealth grows most powerfully when money begins producing value beyond the labor of the person who earned it. This is a profound shift in perspective. Many people think only in terms of active effort. Work, get paid, spend, repeat. Clason invites the reader to imagine a different system, one in which disciplined savings become the seed of future income. The seed becomes a tree, and the fruit of the tree can plant a grove. This imagery matters because it emphasizes patience. Wealth is portrayed as organic. It grows. It does not usually explode into existence. And growth requires time, care, and protection from foolishness. The book does not describe modern investment vehicles, but its principle is broad enough to apply across eras. The point is to place money where it can increase, where it can be directed by wisdom rather than left to stagnate. Yet Clason does not glamorize gain. He is careful to pair this lesson with caution. Money must work, yes, but it must work under sensible conditions. The desire for returns can easily become greed, and greed invites disaster. What Clason wants is not reckless chasing, but disciplined multiplication. He wants the listener to understand that labor alone has limits. One person can only work so many hours, but wisely directed resources can continue working even while the person rests. This principle is one of the deepest in the book because it widens the horizon of what financial life can become. The goal is not merely to have enough for the next bill. The goal is to build a structure that keeps growing stronger. Once money begins to earn on behalf of its owner, the relationship to the future changes. Possibility expands. Pressure lessens. Time itself begins to feel different because the present is no longer carrying the whole burden alone. One of the most practical and enduring lessons in The Richest Man in Babylon is Clason's warning about whom to trust. He tells his readers, in effect, not to seek guidance from people who are not qualified in the matter at hand. The book expresses this through memorable examples. One should not ask a brickmaker about jewels or expect expertise from someone whose skill lies elsewhere. The lesson may sound almost humorous, but it addresses a serious human weakness. When money is involved, people are often vulnerable to confidence, charm, excitement, and urgency. They hand over judgment because they want good news. They want easy gain. They want to believe someone has found a shortcut. Clason's warning is timeless because financial mistakes are so often social mistakes before they become numerical ones. People lose money by trusting enthusiasm instead of competence. They confuse certainty with wisdom. They let desperation or ambition make them careless. The book pushes back against that tendency by insisting that experience matters. If you want counsel on investing, seek someone who has invested wisely. If you want to understand a trade, listen to someone who has lived within that trade. If you want to preserve capital, ask those who know how capital is lost. This principle has a broader moral dimension. It requires humility. To seek wise counsel is to admit that not every opinion deserves equal weight. It is to recognize that the desire for profit can cloud judgment and that expertise is not an insult to independence, but a protection for it. In the modern world, this lesson may be even more urgent. Advice is abundant. Opinions are cheap. Confidence can be performed in an instant. Clason's old-fashioned instruction cuts through all of that. Ask, who truly knows? Who has earned the right to advise? who understands the risks as well as the promises. In a sense, this is not only a financial lesson. It is a lesson in discernment. Prosperity belongs not merely to those who act, but to those who learn how to choose their guides carefully. If saving is the first victory and investing is the second, protection is the third. Clason repeatedly reminds the reader that wealth can disappear just as surely as it can be built. That is why he emphasizes the protection of principle, the guarding of what has already been accumulated. In many ways, this is where the book reveals its maturity. It does not assume that the hard part is only making money. Often the harder part is keeping it without letting impulse, vanity, or greed undo years of effort. The temptation of quick riches is ancient. The dream that one brilliant gamble will replace patience has likely always accompanied human beings. Clason treats this dream with suspicion. He knows that eagerness can make people credulous. He knows that the promise of rapid gain often disguises poor judgment, hidden risk, or outright folly. His answer is sober and perhaps disappointingly simple. Proceed carefully. Understand what you are doing. Do not risk what matters for what merely dazzles. Listen to experienced counsel. Reject deals that demand blind trust or prey on urgency. In this way, Clason presents wealth almost as something living and vulnerable. It must be sheltered while it grows. One reckless act can set a person back years. This lesson also reveals a subtle difference between ambition and wisdom. Ambition says more, faster, now. Wisdom asks what is solid, what is sustainable, what can endure. The book is not anti-growth. It is anti-foolishness. It wants the listener to become the kind of person who is not easily seduced by glitter. In everyday life, this applies beyond investing. It applies to spending on status, to borrowing beyond reason, to chasing appearances of success that weaken actual stability. Clason's larger message is that wealth is not proved by display. It is proved by durability. Real financial strength is quiet. It survives bad seasons. It does not depend on applause. It is built by those who would rather be secure than admired. This is one reason the book still feels morally steady. It invites the reader away from fantasy and towards stewardship. What you build deserves protection. And what deserves protection should never be treated carelessly. The Richest Man in Babylon is not written only for people who are already comfortable. Some of its most meaningful passages are for those who have lost control, taken on too much, or fallen into discouragement. Clason understands that debt is not just a number. It can become a psychological burden, a quiet shame, an erosion of confidence. It can make the future feel closed. What is striking is that the book does not speak to debtors with contempt. It speaks with firmness, but also with hope. The message is that disorder can be repaired. A person can face obligations honestly, create a plan, live within tighter limits, and restore stability over time. This is an important counterpoint to the book's emphasis on discipline. Discipline here is not punishment for failure. It is the path back to dignity. By confronting debts instead of hiding from them, a person begins to reclaim power. By making regular progress, even slow progress, self-respect returns. There is something deeply humane in this part of Clason's vision. He is not merely interested in the accumulation of wealth for its own sake. He is interested in the restoration of order. He wants the reader to know that financial wounds do not have to be permanent identities. Mistakes can teach. Burdens can be reduced. Habits can change. This matters because many people delay repair for emotional reasons. They avoid numbers because numbers feel like judgment. They postpone hard conversations because shame makes them passive. Clason's answer is clear. Face what is owed. Stop pretending confusion will solve itself. Organize. Commit. Continue. In modern language, we might say that the book encourages financial honesty as a form of emotional courage. There is no prosperity without reality. But once reality is faced, progress becomes possible. Debt may narrow a person's freedom, but disciplined action can widen it again. And that widening, even if gradual, is one of the most encouraging movements in the whole book. Among the most valuable lessons in The Richest Man in Babylon is one that is sometimes overlooked because the more famous rules receive most of the attention. Clason does not say merely save what you earn. He also says increase your ability to earn. This expands the book's vision beyond thrift into growth of character and competence. A person who becomes more skilled, more knowledgeable, more disciplined, and more reliable does not merely wish for greater income. That person becomes more capable of producing it. This is a powerful idea because it moves the conversation from scarcity toward agency. Not all circumstances are equal, and Clason does not pretend life is perfectly fair. But he insists that personal development changes economic possibilities. The worker who studies, improves, fulfills responsibilities, and strengthens judgment increases value over time. In that sense, financial progress is tied to becoming. Prosperity is connected not only to what one has, but to who one is becoming through effort. This principle also helps balance the book. Without it, the lessons could sound passive, as though wealth were only about restraint. But Clason includes ambition in the nobler sense. He wants readers to seek excellence, to make themselves useful, to earn trust, to cultivate ability. The message is not simply do less spending. It has also become more capable. The modern listener can hear in this the importance of learning, specialization, communication, adaptability, and long-term reputation. When skill deepens, options increase. When options increase, vulnerability decreases. And when a person combines higher earning power with the habits of saving, wise investing, and protection, financial life strengthens from multiple directions at once. This principle is especially important because it prevents the book from becoming too narrow. Wealth is not only what sits in an account. Wealth begins in habits, but it is supported by value creation. To increase your ability to earn is to treat your own development as an asset. It is to understand that the disciplined mind and the dependable character can generate opportunities that disorder never could. If we step back from the specific financial instructions, a deeper pattern appears in The Richest Man in Babylon. Clason is not only teaching how to handle money, he is teaching how to govern the self. Beneath every rule sits a trait of character. Pay yourself first requires self-respect and delayed gratification. Controlling expenses requires restraint. Investing wisely requires patience. Seeking sound counsel requires humility. Protecting capital requires caution. Repaying debt requires honesty and perseverance. Increasing earning power requires diligence. In other words, the book's financial laws are expressions of personal discipline. This is why the book still resonates. The surface details may belong to ancient parables, but the underlying struggle is timeless. Human beings still wrestle with appetite, impatience, vanity, fear, hope, and comparison. We still want results before process. We still prefer comfort now to security later. We still risk confusing appearance with reality. Clason's stories gently but firmly pull the reader back to an older wisdom. If you want order outside, you must build order inside. Wealth, then, is not merely external accumulation. It is a visible consequence of repeated inward choices. This does not mean every wealthy person is virtuous or every struggling person lacks character. The book is not making a simplistic moral equation, but it is arguing that the habits required for durable prosperity are deeply connected to mature character. That insight makes the book more than a guide to money. It becomes a guide to responsible adulthood. The person Clason admires is not flashy. He is steady. He is someone whose appetites are under direction, whose decisions are informed, whose future is being built quietly. The beauty of the parable form is that this message never feels like a lecture on morality. It emerges through story. We watch people learn that discipline is not deprivation. It is the path to strength. And once that clicks, the book becomes about much more than gold. It becomes about what kind of person can be trusted with abundance. Although The Richest Man in Babylon was written in another era, its principles transfer remarkably well into modern life because they are behavioral rather than technical. Today, paying yourself first may mean setting up automatic transfers into savings or retirement accounts before discretionary spending begins. Controlling expenses may mean recognizing lifestyle inflation, reviewing subscriptions, reducing emotional spending, or choosing values over status. Making money work may mean investing consistently in well-considered vehicles rather than letting cash drift without purpose. Seeking wise counsel may mean learning from qualified professionals, well-grounded educators, and trustworthy sources rather than noise, trends, or social pressure. Protecting capital may mean diversifying, understanding risk, avoiding speculative excitement, and keeping emergency reserves. Increasing earning ability may mean developing skills, pursuing certifications, improving communication, building a reputation, or becoming more adaptable in a changing economy. The details differ, but the structure remains. What makes Clason's book so practical is that it begins with habits available to ordinary people. It does not ask for brilliance. It asks for consistency. That is why the book remains encouraging. Many listeners will not become extravagantly rich. That is not the real promise. The real promise is calmer money, more self-command, less chaos, more preparedness, and a greater sense that the future is not being abandoned. These are enormous gains. In a world where financial advice often swings between panic and hype, Clason offers something steadier. Build patiently. Decide deliberately. Do not confuse motion with progress. Do not surrender your future to appetite. Keep some of what you earn. Direct it wisely. Guard it carefully. Improve yourself steadily. There is a quiet power in such ordinary practices. Over months and years, they change not only accounts, but identity. A person begins to feel less reactive and more intentional. That shift may be one of the most valuable forms of wealth the book has to offer. The Richest Man in Babylon endures because it reminds us that prosperity is rarely created by dramatic moments. It is created by repeated choices that seem small at first and powerful only later. Save something. Spend less than you could. Learn before you leap. Let money work. Protect what you build. Improve your value. Face your obligations. These ideas are simple enough to be overlooked, and yet they are strong enough to change a life. Perhaps that is the book's most enduring insight. People often search for advanced answers before they have practiced the basic ones. Clason gently turns us back toward first principles. He suggests that financial peace is not found in complexity for its own sake, but in order, patience, and disciplined repetition. And beyond finance, the book speaks to a larger truth about life itself. The future is shaped less by intentions than by habits. We become what we practice. Security grows where consistency lives. Freedom begins long before it is visible. So as this summary comes to a close, the message worth carrying forward is not only that money should be managed wisely. It is that a person can become wiser with money, and in doing so become steadier, more capable, and more free. That is the promise beneath the parables. Not instant riches, but a more deliberate life. Not fantasy, but foundation. Not noise, but principles strong enough to outlast time. And perhaps that is why readers continue to return to Babylon. They are not only searching for wealth. They are searching for a way to live with greater order, dignity, and calm. Clason's answer remains as clear as ever. Begin with one wise decision, repeat it faithfully, and let time do the rest.